What's up, guys? This is Marcus from Badcat. Got a quick little tutorial for you today on how to mix a flamenco track. Now, flamenco is a very different type of music, and there's a specific sonic quality that it has. Lots of low end, lots of punch. It's extremely dynamic. The types of reverb that are used are there's lots of decay, and just overall a really great sounding type of music. It's actually my favorite music in any acoustic format, sonically speaking. So this is a track that a friend of mine had done. I had given him some tips on recording. He bought an Apogee 1, and I sold him my old Studio Projects condenser mic, and he ended up doing a really good job. So basically what he's done here is imported a couple of loops into the project that come from some CDs that are basically used for dancers. So I'll play this quickly here. And the second one would be, sorry about that. Yeah, so he's basically used these to as his backing track, so he has a groove to play to, and then he just played on top of that. So I'm going to break these down and give you an overview of the processing of what I've done to them. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do here is mute the verb. We're going to start off with this track here, which is the first groove that we have. And my plugin chain that I use, I have the Slate VCC. I have a UAD 1176, and I have a UAD SPL transient designer. So let's just mute these guys out first, and we'll listen to the loop raw, and this is no verb either. Okay, so the first thing that I want to do here is I need to give this a bit of a vibe, and I love this plugin. It just does an amazing job. I like to set it on RC Tube. I give it a bit of drive, and I'll usually group this and have all my tracks going out with the same processing. You'll notice that I like to leave a blank slate in terms of on top of every channel, because what I usually would do is I would use a utility gain plugin, and I will gain stage my source track going into VCC. But this particular track I did really quickly, and it's hitting it pretty hard, but I let it just do its thing, and I think it still ended up sounding great. So my first signal processing that I'm doing here, let's have a listen to what that's doing. Here is it dry. And I'm going to engage the plugin now. So this just gives it a little bit of a vibe, a little bit of edge. Next thing I did here is I went with that 1176. I wanted to bring out a bit of the sustain, and I wanted to just take care of the attacks a little bit. So when you engage those two together, you end up with. I'll bypass that. So you hear that it ends up bringing out a lot of the sustain of the drums themselves. And the last thing I did is, because I took away a little bit of the transients, I'm going to bring up this guy here for a second. What I actually ended up doing was putting on the SPL transient designer, which gave it some back. And we can hear what that does. So what that does, it brings up the attack, and it brings up the sustain as well, the decay. Now I'm going to throw the verb in there just so you can listen to that. Okay, so that's the basic treatment for that. Next we'll move on to the guitar. We'll listen to it with nothing on it. And again, I'm going to mute my verb so you can hear it from the beginning. I'll bring it up to somewhere where there's a little bit more going on. Okay, one thing to mention here is that the guitar is recorded pretty well on its own. It's got enough space between the mic and the guitar that it's not freaking out on every transient. Tiny bit of space and ambience in there, so this is going to get the same treatment with the VCC. Again, my trusty settings, which is RC tube and a little bit of drive, couple dBs of drive on the group. Next thing I did, which is pretty important, is this is very important here, is my Oxford EQ. So I've set this to do a little bit of cutting and just a tiny bit of boost. I like to cut some treble frequencies out first, and then I might give it a tiny bit of very transparent compression, and at the end I'll give it some EQ. So we can hear what that's doing. I'm going to bypass this for a second. So what I'm doing here is I'm just taking a bit of the low end that we don't really need. I want the guitar to have low end because it's the only thing really instrumentally that's happening. A lot of times in flamenco, the guitar will have a lot of low end and the bass will actually occupy entirely different frequencies. Whereas traditionally in normal music, the bass is going to occupy low end. There is a lot of low end in flamenco guitar, and if it's kind of a solo upfront focus piece, you are going to have that. The next thing I did here is I carved out a little bit of this frequency here, so we can hear what these two guys do. I heard a little bit of buildup. I'm just taking out 0.72 at around 300 Hertz and a half a dB at 540 Hertz. And this is just clearing that space up. Next thing I did was I gave it a tiny bit at around 2K. It's just bringing up a little bit of that presence. And then the last thing I did was give it a high shelf, which is around 6K, just 1.2 dB. This is just very, very gentle stuff. Okay, after that, it's going into the Oxford Dynamics. Now, the reason I use this compressor, this is actually my go-to for any time I want to just basically get my sound sculpted and leveled off. After that, I might take it and put it through something with a little more color. So this compressor here, I have my attack really open. My release is timed with the groove of the song. A bit of a gentle knee and very light compression happening. So I'm just doing this to kind of tame things because I do want to have my level brought up pretty loud on this track. So we can hear what this is doing to it. I'm going to bypass it first. And I'm just going to choose a spot in the track where there's a lot going on. Maybe somewhere like, this looks good. So I guess anywhere from 2 to 3 dBs of compression. And it's just taking the edge off of it. I might play it from this part here. And I'll play that same line without the compressor. Just taking that, just that little bit extra off. Most important part here is the settings, the attack and release. Attack wide open to let the transients through, and release timed with the groove. And last but not least, I have a Harrison EQ here where I'm doing quite a bit of high-end boost around, I guess 6 dB at around 8.5K. And that's bringing out the details and the fingernails and the high-end resonance of the guitar. So now the next most important thing here is my verb, and I'm just gonna hop over here, select this here. Okay, I'm using an EMT 140 by UAD, plate B. I've got quite a lot of decay, and I'm rolling off a bit of the low here. This has got to be my favorite reverb of anything I have here, so this just adds an incredible detail. After I'm actually EQing that reverb return, and what I'm basically doing here is just pulling out a bit of the mids and a very gentle low cut to take care of some of that low end information, just to make sure that it's nice and clean. Okay, so let's have a listen to the track here with everything going on. So the processing that I have going on for all the guitars is very similar. And at the end, it picks up, kind of get a double time, and you have different guitars going in. What I do in these cases, usually I'll group the guitars and send them out to a bus. At this point, I guess it's worth mentioning going over my 2-bus processing, which I have on my master. So first of all, I got the VCC. Then I have an Oxford limiter here, which I'm using just to kind of get my level. I use a bit of this enhance function, which does a similar thing to the inflator. It's kind of like adds harmonic distortion, bit of a tube characteristic. And then I'm using the gain here just to trim this down so that it hits my next plugin. And this actually does quite a bit. After that, I'm going into the UAD Ampex ATR 102, and this here, we'll see what that does. So this just kind of lifts everything out, gives it a bit more detail, brings everything right to the front, a lot more definition in the mid-range. And then last but not least, just simply for level, going into Sonnox Oxford limiter. This guy, I'm bringing down my output level to somewhere around 0.75, and I'm pushing it about 7 dBs in gain. I usually don't like to do any limiting per se, but what I will do is I'll make up the gain. If my mix is peaking at, let's say, -7, then I'll take that amount of gain and give it back to it so that it's still a dynamic mix, and I'm not limiting, but I'm giving it, I'm capping out the ceiling at somewhere just underneath 0, and I'm making up the gain so that it's peaking at 0 instead of peaking at -7. And the Oxford does an incredible job at that, so we can have a listen to what that's doing. So And that's my basic approach that I take to mixing flamenco music. Try to leave it as dynamic as possible and give it lots of punch, lots of space. And with the guitar tones, the trick is really in recording it well. And very, very mild compression, allowing the transients and the dynamics to stay there, and not treating it as if though it's you know, type of guitar where you want to compress and get rid of everything. So anyways, I hope you got something from this tutorial, and I look forward to doing another. Take care.